Welcome everybody for episode 7 of the Brand Exchange podcast. My name is Yohji. I'm super thrilled to introduce my guest this week, and he's the world's most famous German-speaking brand strategist in the world. Also on the non-speaking German part, of course, but he's a brand strategist, he's an entrepreneur, he's a podcast host, he is a mentor, and of course an author with Amazon #1 bestsellers like, the brand therapy book, Bigger Than This, and How to Launch a Brand. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you care the slightest amount of branding, please don't listen to me even today. Just please listen to what Fabian has to say. He's a long-time hero of mine. I've been following him for a very, very, very long time, and I am super, super amazed that he's here today. And Fabian, thank you so much. One last thing, he's a principal of Finian, LA-based brand consultancy. He is a founder and CEO of Tone Optic and one of the top 100 mentors, global mentors of the Founders Institute. Fabian, welcome to the show.
That was a pretty nice introduction. Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, next time we do one in German, but let's stick to English today. And I'd love to ask you first: Have you ever been to Asia before?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Where did you travel?
Well, my wife is from Korea.
Okay.
She lives in the United States. Obviously, that's where we live. But yeah, so I've been to Korea. I've been to Thailand. I've been to like couple places, Bali, etc. The typical tourist spots. But yeah, I didn't spend as much time in Asia as I wanted to. I've been to Singapore for a quick second, but yeah, not as much as I wanted to. Most of my business is in Europe or in the United States. Ever since the pandemic, I've been doing a good amount of projects in Brazil and in India. But
nice.
but yeah. Only a couple of clients every now and then in Asia. So
well, I guess I'd like to tackle on India for just a few seconds, because that, I guess, have a lot of similarities to the Southeast Asian market.
Yeah.
Like what is like one of the things that you have noticed for brand behaviors? What's like a huge difference, or what was a shock to you when you first time interacted with an Asian client?
Well, it's difficult, right? Because the only Asian clients that I've worked with are companies that have a headquarter in another city than in Asia, right? So those are basically global companies that had their co-founders, their managing partners, etc., from different areas of the world. So
okay.
Cultures are significantly different, and the way that people see brands is significantly different, right? Especially when you compare India with Central Europe, right? Or something like that. I mean, it's completely stark differences. And I appreciate differences in culture, but I think that there's a reason why a lot of the great branding comes out of the United States, and a lot of the great branding comes out of some of the big cities out of Europe. And every time I work with a client out of Asia, out of Southeast Asia, India, and even out of like more Eastern Europe, and kind of like countries that are not smack in the US or smack in Central Europe, those are always the ones that say, I want to build a global brand. I want to build a real brand. I want to have a brand that people fall in love with, right? And that is something that is beyond a national, regional, brand. And that way, for me, it's easier to not go too much into the nuances of what makes a regional company be successful, but more of what builds a brand that is being loved, nationally and internationally, right, on like a global level. So my thinking is bigger than a country, because I think a true brand is bigger than the country where it comes from.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I mean, we mostly work with Southeast Asian companies, like mostly like tech startups from Singapore, but also of course a lot of Philippine companies. And I can only agree to what you just said. It's usually that like global dominancy vision that is behind like, okay, we want to conquer this entire industry and therefore we need to have words like transcendent in our core values or something like that, right?
Yes.
All right. Before we talk about global brands, let's start at the beginning. And I filtered some of the most asked questions from some recent community events here in Asia that I've been asked the most from startup founders. And I know you answered a million times, and I know you have also a million different answers to it. But Fabian, what is branding and why should anyone start caring about it?
What is branding today for me? Yeah, you're absolutely right. I try not to think about that question, to answer it at any given show, because it always, I mean, look, I wrote it down in my book and that's a certain answer,
Yes.
but I think, I mean, look, it's also, everyone tries to overstate it and tries to come up with these scientific, emotional ways, but in the end, branding is a vibe, right? It's a vibe. It's a vibe that you either create or that you build upon. Either it already exists and you need to focus in on it, but it's a vibe, and sometimes that vibe is very easy to feel and sense, and it's really difficult afterwards to showcase on an ongoing marketing level. And sometimes it is something that is much deeper, right? Where it is from a business perspective. It goes into, and that's when we talk about strategy, right? It goes into positioning and it goes into purpose and it goes into all of this. But in the end, still, even B2B, the way that a company is positioned, it is a vibe. It's like you get a vibe of like, oh, they're right for me. They're in the Gartner index and they fit right there. And I go to the website and it's super easy to understand the features and it's easy to understand that this is the right product for me. It's still a vibe. You get the vibe of like, that's right for me. That is a fit, right? And so, right. I don't know, today, right now in August, in August 22, to me, branding is a vibe.
Okay. I love it. Yeah. My answer is always a feeling. So I just, going after Martin Neumeyer a little bit. I like that word slightly better than vibe, but absolutely loving the description. So,
you're not vibing with a vibe. You're vibing with a feeling.
Yeah. I'm vibing with a feeling today. That's my August feeling this year. Okay. The other community question that I consolidated from all the recent startup events is that if I understand that branding is a vibe, branding is a feeling, when should I start investing into building that vibe? At the beginning, before I have a product or service cleared out? Is it after? Does it really depend on the person or the business?
I mean, in the end, the way that I like to look at this problem is branding can never be done too soon if you describe branding the way that I just did, right? If it's a feeling or a vibe, people need to get that feeling immediately. If you have nothing to show, you don't even have a product, you just have an idea, and you're standing in a startup pitch event, people still get a feeling of who you are. They have that vibe, right? So, and you create this by how you represent yourself, by the slides that you show, by the story that you tell, right? And so that's at the most rudimentary way. And I think that even that startup founder with $0 in the pocket, they think about branding because they created themselves during those first days. But when we fast forward to actually, like a small startup, a real company, even though they might have zero revenue, but it's a real company because they're actually creating something, creating a brand, meaning a look and feel and a positioning and a purpose behind it, and showcasing it in a way that translates perfectly to the specific audience that they want to reach. And they do that in a way where people are just like, wow, this is really different and this is super cool, this is interesting. And they haven't even bought the product yet. They haven't even bought the service yet. Right. That, if you as a startup entrepreneur tell me that's not important or we don't need that, then you're completely disillusioned, right? Like, it's just, And that's why I think I say it right here behind me. It's, I see branding as a layer of insurance, right?
Okay.
It's an insurance layer, because if your product flops, or if one of the features flops, or if you put it out at the wrong price, people will still like you because they like what you stand for. They like what they saw so far. They like what you post on social media. They like you as a brand. And then you can screw up along the way. They will still like you. Or best yet, they love your product and they love your brand. But then a competitor comes out with the exact same product, because that's what they will. If you do anything good, they will come out with the same product, right? Or a very
Right.
similar product, and they will undercut you in price. And then guess what? If you have a brand, people are not going to go to the other ones because they trust you and they like you, because it became personable, right? And that's what branding is. It makes something that is just like surface level really deep and more meaningful and more interesting and more personable.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's actually part of the answer that I'm also giving, is that to just focus on yourself first, and that also means to not overcomplicate any of your brand materials, like especially like the visual brand elements. People tend to like go crazy with it and add a bunch of triangles and circles and butterflies on it, and say like, okay, I think if you're in the beginning phase, like speak what's on your heart, right? Like get the vibe across, and then you stand for that vibe until your company is ready to become that channel of communication. But before that, people love to buy things from people, right? We are much more drawn to faces than to logos. That's why us talking here is much more appealing than having a white screen with both of our company's logos on there, and it's just like a little wave line for the audio representation. And I think personal brand, I mean, it's also true that I came to you because I saw your face all over the internet, because I'm living in my brand strategy world, and that's how I through Finian, and how I bought a book, and how we bought the E-Resonate course, etc., 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 right? So it really starts at the person who represents the company for everyone. I hope that sums it up. Fabian, I know that you love working with startups. Why is that in particular?
Well, and I think we need to be a little clear about what that means, because
Okay.
I was struggling working with like super small, bootstrapped startups. And
Okay.
even though I liked the founders and I loved the interaction, I now prefer mentoring them versus working with them. Now the startups that I work with, they have good funding, or they've got great revenue. They're usually like a little bit more mature, a couple of years in. But what I love is I love working with founders directly. So
Yeah.
I like not working. I mean, look, there might be some clients of mine listening, and they're CMOs, and I love all of my CMO clients. But there's something about working directly with a founder, and I think that they would agree, where there is that excitement, there's this spark, there is that passion that marketing kind of kills over time, right? So you have the founder, they're super excited, they go the first 6-12 months, and like you said, they are the brand. And then at some point they need to build a marketing team, and then CMOs step in, and everything gets more corporate and things get done. But the soul of the brand is a little bit missing, or it gets diluted. Sometimes the soul is rebuilt, and there's an amazing brand being built, and the founder can slowly step away, and more power to that. That's great too. But more
Right.
often than not, when I come in a couple years in, and they need to rebrand, they need to redesign, they need to rethink the purpose of the company, the strategy of the company, of the brand, right? That's when I come in, and I love working directly with the founders, because it almost feels like there's something inside of them that's been, like they've been waiting to bring that out again, but they haven't been asked, because they let marketing do their thing. And when it comes to a big rebrand, you know that about me, right? But I spent 8 hours with them, thinking through their brand. And it's very different from other agencies. And I think, to me, that's what makes it so successful, is because
Yeah.
their passion is being reignited. Everyone can sense it on their team, and it's true, it's authentic, and
Yeah.
that's why I love working with startups.
Okay. I think I saw that through so many nights, and I came to the conclusion that we as brand strategists, and I'm not talking for both of us right now, but like me and my co-founder are literally just, we get paid a decent amount of money, and that money is at a point where everyone in the startups understand, okay, this is important, let's come together, ignore all the other bullshit out there, and just talk about us a little bit. And like, even if we would ask the most stupidest question, the chance that maybe the lead of design or the head of sales can have a very humane, relaxed chat together with the founders, which will never happen, right? It will never happen in a normal day-to-day. It's already so incredibly valuable that everyone just tries to ignore it for a few seconds, that things come out that are usually not talked about. And I think that's also something that we try to communicate to our clients, is that like, you don't necessarily need us for the long run, right? Like, we are just trying to spark some of this spirit, and then just get into the habits of like DIY, doing it yourself, like building like a minimum viable brand like process or something like that. And that's why I love also working with startups. But thank you for answering it also on your end.
But guess what? I mean, these clients who you tell that to, right? They will still hire you a couple of years later and just say, "Hey, that thing that we did, let's redo this." And because it's so much easier to, it's kind of like if you go to a therapist and then you're like, "Oh, I get it. They ask a couple of questions and I answer them. I can do that myself." No, you can't. That's the thing. Like people need that layer of someone else, right? And that's why I call it brand therapy, because I really think it's so much like it. You just absorb, right? And you know when to ask the right questions to push it forward, when to back up a little bit, right?
Correct.
I think that's part of brand strategy's success, is to actually be able to do that. Versus having this cookie cutter thing where you can never stop. You can never go deep dive 30 minutes. It's just like boom, boom, boom. And I think a lot of brand strategists, and sorry, I'm going out on a thing here,
it's okay.
but
No,
a lot of brand strategists feel like it's about checking off boxes. And that's exactly what it's not about. It's about stories, and it's about letting everyone talk to each other and uncover like some of these thoughts that, that are deep inside of people, and they just never talk about it. So anyway, that's why it's brand therapy.
Going back to brand strategy, one thing that I often realize is that people have, not a real brand strategy, or just pump it up with like fake words that actually don't mean anything or don't represent the story. And I'm wondering if a brand strategy that is badly executed can not just be useless, but also hurt your brand. Is that possible?
Absolutely. I mean, I think anything that you fake can hurt you, right? And I think most of the time and that's also, it happens a lot that agencies come in and they say, "Hey, we're going to come back with some great brand strategy in 2 weeks." It's like, that's not how it's done, right? It has to be co-created. It has to come from the inside. And so I think that that's very often where it can actually hurt the brand more than help the brand. Because the brand, people feel, and that's why it goes back to the vibe, right? People get the vibe. It's like, hey, is this fake? Is it real? Does it go back to, is what they say represented everywhere? And there's nothing worse than all of these companies that you look at and you read what they tell you that they do, and then you go deeper and you start to understand that is actually incorrect. Like, they are just making it seem better or making it seem more exciting. And that's what happens with brand strategy. If you say, hey, let's look 5 years into the future, and then let's make that our strategy today, but the product isn't there yet. The service isn't there yet. The people aren't on board, right? So it's, yes, to answer your question, it could become quite problematic.
Okay. So for entrepreneurs, startup founders that, getting bombarded by design agencies now suddenly offering brand strategy, what is your advice? What people should, take care of when they see a proposal like that? What is the worst thing to avoid here?
I think the biggest thing to avoid is having either a process that feels like there's no time to really talk together as a team, or they have a process that is super long, super lengthy for brand strategy, because it really shouldn't take that long, right? Yeah. Think about it more as in, when you talk to them on the first initial calls, do you feel like they listen or do you feel like they talk, right? If they talk, they're not going to be great at brand strategy. If they listen, you know they're going to be most probably good.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very clear. I hope everyone got that. So don't take direct advice. People cannot never give you a good advice if they haven't listened before they talk anything. So yeah, hope all the startup founders heard that. All right, I do have a few selfish questions because I remember when Gary Vee was interviewing Mark Zuckerberg, he basically said in the beginning, like, yeah, usually I'm going to do these kind of podcast events for my followers, but today I have a once in a lifetime opportunity, so I'm just going to ask a bunch of selfish questions. And I'm going to do that now as well. And one of the things is that, so I agree that we work with startups and the experience is just so amazing. And I love doing it. People love it. The team just has a completely different view of things afterwards, which is so fulfilling for us. But sometimes I just think about, I want to make a bigger impact in the world with bigger companies. But especially in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, it is just that every company that is, let's say, more than 20 years old and has, a certain size, that like the decision maker, the chairman, the chairwoman, whatever these days, right? It is just impossible to crack that. Like I can get the meeting. I have, I know a lot of people. I can get in that room, and sometimes I can even get the project, but it is not a good project for us because the people, at least, don't open up and don't care for any brand related things, maybe because it's a new thing and it hasn't existed that strongly when they were building the company. But I guess my main question is it possible to create meaningful brands out of companies where the decision makers seem to only care about the revenue that it will generate?
Well, given the example that you gave, right? So if it's like a Fortune 500 company in Asia, right, for instance, absolutely you can. If it is a small founder-led company and the founder does not believe in branding, you will never even get in, right? And then, no, you can't. But I do very, very strongly believe that you can. Every Fortune 500 understands branding is important. They understand brand's important. And they more likely than not have already gone through a similar exercise with an agency in the past. The problem is if they've gone through a similar exercise with an agency in the past and it was not successful, or they felt it was not successful, then to them, that's over. To them, that idea of brand strategy in that true sense is over. Weirdly enough, they're still marketing, even though a lot of marketing campaigns didn't work, right? So it is a little bit more of an uphill battle. But I mean, look, I worked with some of the largest companies in the world, right? I mean, I worked with Randstad in Amsterdam. I worked with Honeywell in, here locally in the US. And I mean, in the end, what it's all about is you don't work on the global level. You work with smaller teams, right? So when I worked with Randstad, I worked on like a startup fund that they had internal within Randstad. When I worked with Honeywell, I worked in their drone division on a certain, project. And then you position and you create strategy for that specific unit or for that specific product or for that specific sub-brand. And that usually is just as successful as if you work with a small founder team.
I see. Okay. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. Obviously you can't change the world all at once, right? You have to start somewhere, and then breaking it into the local teams will give you the same startup vibe. Yeah, okay, got it. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. Have you recently worked with any Web3 projects? Has that already occurred in your client base?
It's this subculture, and everyone just sees the same things constantly, so they want to create the same things, right? And I think there are a couple of them that are just rising to the top because they actually change things and they do it differently. And I would not be discouraged working with any of those companies because, again, it all depends on the vision of the founder, if they want to make a quick buck or if they just want to sell it or if they just want to, right? Or if they actually really want to make a big dent and they've got a bigger vision that's outside of Web3 and outside of crypto, right? Because why do you create this company? you shouldn't create it because of crypto or Web3. You should create it for what that main purpose is. Where can you take this? And then it becomes a real brand like any other brand, and the rest is just it's a transportation device to get you there.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one more story that I always tell the crypto, fintech, Web3 circle is that a year or 2 years ago, all my friends told me to use Binance if you want to get into crypto. But I looked at Binance and it looked like it was all black and it was neon yellow and it looked like some crazy, it looked like a gaming platform almost. And then Coinbase rebranded and looked like a really solid, modern, with the old Uber logo style, just solid fintech company that looks like I can trust with my money. And I did not listen to any of my friends. I just went with Coinbase. And I think that is the difference for like proper positioning, knowing your market, knowing we're talking about money and not playing around with monopolies or anything, right? I'm giving these people my money, right? So we have to think this through.
It's also logical that companies like Coinbase at some point there's a certain size where they just have tons of research, and the research shows people don't trust companies like yours. Oh, good. What do we need to do? Well, we need to create a trustworthy brand. Well, big freaking deal. Genius, right? So it's like it happens over time, and I think some companies that you and I work with, they get these things earlier than others, where and then it just takes like tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars of research to understand that people don't trust that stuff. And look at the NFTs, right? I mean, it's amazing what NFTs could do, and it's laughable what NFTs are doing right now, right? And so it's very easy for the public to have this weird, sense for it all. And I mean, you ask me, have I worked with Web3 companies? And I say no, but in reality, I have. But I don't even see them as Web3, because to me, that's like not even where it can be or will be.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it really comes back to definition, as you mentioned earlier. Everything is potato salad right now.
Totally. From one German to an Austrian, it's potato salad.
All right. We talked for a long time already. Since the Austrian and the German don't joke around, let me end it on a sad note. That's something that personally keeps me up at night, because, we always have such a big impact with our clients. And here in Southeast Asia, I see like the polluted cities and everything. And I many times try to think about what could I do to give the Save the Planet brand a little bit more power. And I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you could base it off of a brand like the UN or something else, or just us as brand strategists. What do you think the Save the Planet brand needs to have to get just a little bit more vibe across to everyone to get some action without having a too political answer?
First of all, yes, I share your sentiment, right? Like we're pretty screwed here on this planet, and we've got no one to blame but ourselves. I don't know there is a Save the Planet brand, and I don't know how to help that brand because I don't know if it exists. But what I do know is there are tons of brands and simple companies and simple individuals that are out there that conglomeratively put together that Save the Planet brand, right? I think the Save the Planet brand does not need to be revamped, because I think that every day it changes drastically. And I think it changes in the way that you and I think about what does it mean to save this planet? What does climate change really mean? It is very different to you and I in August 22 than it was in December of 21. And it's completely different in December 21 than it was in. And so very often, it's not really a brand. It's really an action right now, right, and an urgency, and we haven't seen such a sense of urgency 3 months ago than we see today, right? And
Yeah.
I can share this with you. I worked last week. I did a brand workshop with two companies that are heavily involved in changing, adjusting the climate, making sure that there's less pollution, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked one of my exercises is, hey, like if your brand goes away in 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, what would you leave? What's your legacy? And we had a really hard time. And I told them, I'm like, look, if your sole purpose as a company is to stop climate change from happening, and I ask you, why would your company go away in 50 years from now? Shouldn't the answer be because we reversed the tide and because climate change is not a problem anymore and we're good again? And they said that is impossible. And so that made me feel, and you said, let's stop in a depressive way. And that's a company, it's a small company, right? But it's an international company. And I'm like, we are really screwed. And so I think that from a brand perspective, the best thing that everyone can do is get their own stuff right? And, someone like you could have a podcast only with companies that actually push for climate change, that actually do something, right? We could start working with companies to get them there, or make that a big thing. But I think this is important, and I want to share this with everyone because I think it's an ideology problem right now. I mentor a lot of strategists, a lot of brand strategists. I've got a group where I mentor them, and in that group, I would say most of them say, or a lot of them say, I'm only working with companies that do good in the world. Like I'm only going to support them with my time and with my, right? I'm only going to take money from these kind of clients. And I think it's wrong. Like I personally want to work with companies that are currently screwing up the planet in order to leave a mark with them that they screw the planet less. And so to me, I think that the larger the companies and the bigger the impact and the worse of pollutants they are, I actually really enjoy working with them because I feel that even if I do a 1% change in how they behave and the purpose that they have and what they do, that can be much more impactful than if a company comes to me and says, we're going to save the world. I'm like, yeah, good. Then go ahead and do that. I'm going to work with the ones that don't save the world, and I'm going to push them to do the same. So it's just my philosophy, but I stick to it.
Okay, I'm going to send this podcast later to a Philippine petrol company, and let's see what's going to come out. Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah. Actually, that was very nice. I really loved that answer. I'm going to think about later. I'm going to contact some people. Fabian, this was absolutely amazing. I know you're a very busy man. It's bedtime soon, and you've shared with us so many insights. So I'm very thrilled to invite you again, maybe next year, to get an update on the climate change and save the planet brand. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us. I am super grateful.
Hey Yohji, it's a great pleasure to support you and your tribe. I know you've been supporting me with following my content and buying the books and the course and stuff. So absolutely, it was a great pleasure, and thank you for a lot of good questions. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.